Welcome, dear viewer, at UBC TV and Monday Akol Amazima here in studio. Yes, today this is our education forum where we go back to the basics of our education. Today we are actually going continental, and in continental we shall be discussing this very evening on how best we can collectively work together in shaping our education or shaping our education leadership in Africa collectively. Now, with me here in studio is Mr. Gahungu Nathan from the Association of Promotion of Sustainable Education Services. You're welcome.
Thank you.
Yes, also online we shall be joined by a number of panelists across the continent as we discuss this very important topic on how we can collectively shape our education leadership for purposes of developing the continent. Yes, Mr. Gahungu, let's look at collectively shaping our education leadership for sustainable development. How should it be done?
Good afternoon, viewers. Once again, I'm Nathan Gahungu. I'm the chairperson of Association for Promotion of Sustainable Education Services in Uganda. This is an organization that aims at looking at inequalities that are within the education sector, but as well as supporting vulnerable children and also families which cannot afford education for quality education for their children. As all you know, education is the foundation for one's life. Without proper and good education, quality education, indeed you are doomed. Therefore, in fact, I want to thank those ones who promote education as a right. In fact, it's a human right that education should be supported. It is something that where every nation should commit adequate resources to ensure that we get education for our children, we get education for our population, and not only education, but quality education. Therefore, when we are dealing with an issue of education, we don't look at states, we look at the global. We go global. We look at what education is being given. How applicable is it at national level, at global level, and for how long? Is it education that we can impart from one generation to another generation without causing harmful impacts? Therefore, for me, when we talk about education, we are talking about a sensitive issue which should not be looked at as a nation, but which should be looked at as globally.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Nathan Gahungu. As I earlier said, that we are having actually other panelists from across the continent. Joining us on Zoom is Professor Juliet Perumari from the University of Johannesburg, who's actually the chair, Africa Education Leadership Roundtable. You're welcome, Professor. Professor, are you online? Okay, we shall be joined by Professor Perumari from South Africa, that's the University of Johannesburg. We shall also be joined by Professor Juliet. You're welcome.
Thank you, sir. Yes, I appreciate the opportunity to participate in this dialogue. I'm glad for the invitation to talk about the Africa Education Leadership Roundtable. We've just come off from a 2-day roundtable conference, and our theme was the future of equity, inclusion, and diversity, implications for education leadership. I will elaborate a little further when you need me to. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much, Professor. We are also joined by Professor Nkadi from the University of Nigeria. You're welcome, Professor.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here, and I don't know what to say, but it was a surprise to me, and I'm glad to be here. At least join with other people in seeing what we can do and contribute to this educational leadership role in Africa as a whole, and we share experiences. Thank you, organizers, for inviting me.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Nkadi Onyegebo. You know, Nigerian names at times are difficult for us East Africans. Now, we come to Dr. Christine Peter from Zimbabwe. You're welcome. Dr. Christine Peter, are you online? Well, as we wait for Dr. Christine Peter to join us, I go straight to Professor Juliet Vermal from the University of South Africa, University of Johannesburg. University of Johannesburg now for the 6th time has been holding the Africa Education Leadership Roundtable. Can you please take us through why exactly the Education Leadership Roundtable was thought of and what it has managed to achieve now after 6 years?
Yes, thank you very much. So the idea for the Africa Education Leadership Roundtable came as a result of a proposition from Professor Philip Hellinger, who is regarded as the father of instructional leadership, and he's highly cited researcher in the field. On his appointment as a distinguished visiting professor, he talked to me about the prospect of establishing this roundtable, and it's actually modeled on an existing Asia Education Leadership Roundtable. And Professor Hellinger invited a few of my colleagues from the Department of Education, Leadership and Management at the University of Johannesburg to join in the Asia Roundtable. And there we had the opportunity to interact with colleagues from Singapore, Taiwan, and China. And that particular roundtable, at the particular roundtable, we saw how colleagues from within the ASEAN region were getting together to collaborate on research and teaching and education leadership roundtable, education leadership issues. And so we penned, Professor Hellinger helped us to pen together the goals for the Africa Education Leadership Roundtable, which is to strengthen our networks of scholars in education leadership and management at both international and institutional level, to develop an agenda for research on education, leadership, and management in Africa and the African diaspora, to collaborate in current and future research projects, and to enhance personal and professional relationships. So, as I said, we started the Africa Education Leadership Roundtable in 2016. And for that particular year, the theme was developing an agenda for research on education and leadership and management in Africa. We were able to attract 8 African countries who participated in the roundtable. But just to provide some context, between the years 2016 and 2019, the Africa Education Leadership, like the Asia Education Leadership Roundtables, were pretty exclusive platforms, which means that only select people attended and by invitation. So we would have to raise funds in which to fly people from across the continent to South Africa, where we would spend a day and a half in presenting issues that were prevalent in whichever countries were represented. And so through the years, we've 2017, for example, we looked at just Africa leadership and management issues. 2018, issues relating to the fourth industrial revolution, and 2019, leadership and cultural values. When the pandemic hit pretty much globally, the COVID-19 pandemic, we had to take the forum online. And one of the benefits of it is that it actually pulled down some of the barriers that people would have had in terms of paying for an airline ticket and to come to South Africa. So our numbers from our initial 8 grow to 14 countries participating. And this year, I'm very happy to say that we once again hosted the Roundtable virtually, and we were able to attract 20 participants from 25 different countries in both the English-speaking and Francophone Africa, and we had about 50 different papers that were presented. Pretty much that is how that started out.
Well, I thank you very much, Professor Juliet from the University of Johannesburg. Now we go to West Africa to Professor Nkadi Onyegebu. We wish to know how the University of Nigeria and perhaps the education leadership in Nigeria is facilitating collective, collaborated development in education.
Okay, thank you so much, Chairman. And I thank the South African lady who just spoke, and that we have something that is coming up in an African educational leadership and management in education. I don't have any paper to say. I'm going to talk from experience, just like you asked me this question. One, I must say that education has an important role to play in our lives, in our economy, and in our culture, and in our political, resonance. And then coming from a university, I've been a secondary school teacher for 14 years. Then I moved to the University of Nigeria and Nsukka for now 28 years, and I will talk to you from experience. Nigeria is a very large country. You know that I wouldn't like, in as much as I would talk about Nigeria being, naturally endowed in terms of human and natural resources. You also find out that in that natural resources or in the human resources, most people in Nigeria are very intelligent. We have a beautiful educational system and a good, well-articulated and focused policy on education. If you look at the goals, they are very, very good. Down from pre-primary, primary, secondary, and even at the tertiary level, you see that the 100%, but if you look focused. But the major problem of Nigeria is in implementing of those beautiful policies into practice. And it happens at the pre-primary, it happens at the secondary, it happens at the tertiary, and now is eating up so much those non-implementation of those beautiful practices in instructional and in teaching and learning, and even the structures. And then you move to the leadership. What do you mean by leadership in the university? Everything Nigeria now, educationally wise, is politicized, I must say. And we are not having the right leaders. We are not having the good leaders that will be able, especially in education, taking from the primary school head teachers, the nomination of the primary school teachers or elected of the primary school teachers, it's not from the qualities of the education that he or he has, but where does he come from? What political, party does he or she belongs? And where does the governor come from? So you can see right along that we have some gaps that are eating inside our educational system from the pre-primary. Even though you asked me about the tertiary in the university, is the same thing happening in the primary, in the secondary, and even in the tertiary, where leadership roles of those who are supposed to be at the helm of affairs, leading, not in managerial of the schools, are not properly placed. Not that they don't have the qualifications, but what about the skills? They might have the qualifications, but the skills are not there. And then in the university, it's a long story where it's canvassed within the ASU and then the politics or who is at the top. And this is what is happening. So invariably,
Thank you, Professor, for your insight. But before we can actually blame policymakers and perhaps our leaders, let's look at individual level. At your individual level, let's look at the institutional level, the University of Nigeria, Nsukka. What initiatives are you putting in place to have this collaborated, networked, collective leadership development in our education? Then I'll also request you to lean backwards so that your face can ably be seen by all the viewers. Yes, I think that's proper.
Okay.
Yes.
So you're looking for, you're looking for the contributions.
Yes, at individual level, because Nigeria has the biggest, the largest number or the biggest number of PhDs in Africa. And therefore want to know that how does this translate into providing leadership for having an education that works for Africa?
Well, I don't know what I can do squarely with that, but as for me as an individual, I'm the head of Department of Science and Education. You know, the experiences I have gathered as a person, having a PhD in biology and reproductive health issues, and being a conch researcher, what, am I putting in place that, that will shape the leadership of my head of department is based on the kind of experiences that I have gathered as an ordinary classroom teacher transcending to a university professor. One is, having, believing in myself that I can do this, believing and what kind of styles do I have? Do I get, people to work for me? Do I choose the right people to work for me? Am I honest? Am I being transparent? What are the resources available for me to do this and do that and bring up my, my objectives of my goal of, being a head of department. So if that we take from that angle, experiences first, and what do you have as knowledge, will also help. And then the kind of trust that people around you have, and the kind of trust that you have for yourself, and the kind of competence that you have for yourself, and the kind of, openness in, getting and acknowledging that this person can contribute, this person can contribute, person can contribute in ideas, will make the kind of style of the educational leadership in my, in my department. Harnessing the talents of who are around me that are capable of doing this and that and that and that and that and that. What I tell you, Chairman, the first thing is for having trust. Trust.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Nkadi Onyegebu from the University of Nigeria. Now we go south to Zimbabwe. I don't know whether Dr. Christine Peter has actually joined us so that he can also give us the situation in Zimbabwe. Of course, Zimbabwe is also one of the countries where has a very good number of land people, educated people. So can we hear from Dr. Peter if she has joined us? Yeah, Dr. Peter, I think, is yet to join us from Zimbabwe, but when she joins us, of course, she'll be giving us the situation in Zimbabwe. Yes, I come back to studio here with Nathan. Let's look at civil society, NGOs that are actually working on matters of education, or education NGOs. Do you have like a network of education NGOs across the continent where you can collectively provide leadership in ensuring that our education works for the continent, our education works for our people?
First of all, I want to tell you that education cuts across many sectors. When you are tackling education, you don't look mainly at education maybe as academic. We look at education in a multidimensional way, because, for instance, there are other factors that affect education, yet they are not actually addressed totally as education. For instance, if you look at issues to do with health, issues to do with food, issues to do with housing, and all of that, and even security and health, all of that, they affect education. So for us, what we have done, we have a forum that looks at uniting NGOs, civil society organizations, to champion, talk, to lobby, and advocate for quality education for all. Therefore, it has always been an issue to say that for us we are going to look at one issue, maybe academic, although we collaborate with universities, but basically we look at education in a holistic manner. For instance, when you are talking about education for let's say, to serve the poor community, you look at where they come from, the housing, the clothing, water, security, and other social services provided. Therefore, we have looked at a number of ways and decided to come up as civil societies, and a civil society that leads to betterment of education sector is our partner. We collaborate with them. But specifically, we collaborate with universities. For instance, Makerere University, Mbarara University, and other tertiary institutions. But what is key here? For us, what is key is to ensure that we produce graduates, we have an output that is qualitative, an output that will help in building state and helping people at individual level. When we talk of education, we start looking at how is it from home before a child goes to school? How is he after school? Or if he drops in the middle of education? Therefore, we have a number of things to look at. As Professor Nkandi has put it, our interest is more on how education impacts on our economy. We look at the social economic, we look at the environment, we look at culture, we look at the generally global. But we also look at those factors that have affected education, both external and internal. Because some of the factors are maybe extraneous, we cannot actually control them, but we look at them. For example, globalization. Globalization has actually greatly affected education, and economies and our countries seem not to have understood that this is a key factor that has actually diluted our education, so that the education we have is not necessarily serving our needs. Therefore, for us as a civil society, we are dealing with a complex issue. How is it a complex issue? Our states, Africa, has failed to recognize education as a key, as a fundamental sector. Very important as security, very important as health. Because the moment you neglect education, it means that the nation is bound to remain backward. Look at these countries which are developed. Look at the US, look at Europe, look at Japan, and even the Middle East, and actually the South, the Asia. You find that the reason why Africa is actually backward, the quality of education, the quality and the quantity of education, the research is all below standards. That's why we even invest a lot of money taking our children in Europe, in the US. Yet, if we had strengthened our education here, we would be very far.
Well, I thank you very much. Hold on to your point, and I go now down to South Africa to Professor Juliet Perumali. You've hinted on the issue of research, and to the best of my knowledge, papers, when you present a paper, when you write a paper, that is actually as a result of research, though the research is not as intensive as when perhaps you're doing the main research. Now, you've just held the 6th Education Leadership Roundtable. That was on 27th and 28th of this month. How are you going to make it relevant that whatever was discussed, the resolutions, the papers that were actually presented, how do you turn them? How do you use the various presentations made to turn around our education system, to help build the education system, since the University of Johannesburg has now come up to provide leadership in this area?
Sorry, the intention for the papers that were presented at the Africa Roundtable is to actually reach out back to the presenters and to encourage them to submit full-scale, full-length academic papers. We have a book series with Routledge, the publishers, entitled Perspectives on Education in Africa. And we would then invite our presenters to develop this into full-length papers so that they could be, appear in a book manuscript, which would be, disseminated and open to a broader public. I think that's important for us because a repeated critique that we hear is that on the African continent, we tend to be consumers of Western and Eurocentric conceptions of education leadership, well, in particular, but pretty much a lot of other stuff in general. So the idea is for us to encourage more African authors, more African researchers to participate and to ventilate and to provide a forum for them to be able to contribute to knowledge creation, knowledge critique. So that would be one of our intentions, and to also engage in further dialogue and collaborative research. During the 2-day conference, there was, which I mentioned, the theme was on equity, inclusion, and diversity. There were several issues that came to the fore, which have a lot of commonality, a lot of common issues that various countries on the African continent share, especially in regards to the social cultural issues, with regards to gender issues, race. Hello, there seemed to be an interference on the line. Yes. With regard to also the technopolitics about who has access to technology, what type of access do they have, and how does it actually include and exclude us from the African continent from participating. And of course, there are issues regarding to geopolitics, like where people are situated, what are their status in terms of citizenship, and we've had an increase, for example, in kidnappings at schools, from schools. So these are issues that are not just common to South Africa, but we hear them resonate across the African continent. And our intention is to see how we can put our heads together to be able to look for resolutions to these issues.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Juliet from University of Johannesburg, that is in South Africa. I must thank you that also I was privileged to be part of the team that presented, and my paper was on education, and that is how the displaced people in Africa can easily access education, or education leadership to the displaced people in Africa, with a case study in Uganda, looking at how Uganda has managed really to help displaced people both internally and externally. Externally, those of course that are the refugees, how basically they can access education, how they manage to access education, and the challenges, and perhaps what ought to be done so that everybody who comes here as a refugee can easily go back to their countries when they are professionals or when they have attained particular skills. Dr. Christine Peter from Zimbabwe, I'm told she's having network issues and she has not been able to join us, but as and when she is ready, or as and when the network allows her in Harare, we shall let her in. Yes, Professor Nkadi from University of Nigeria. How is the situation like in Nigeria?
In our collaboration with NGOs, you're asking, is it the same question we had with the lady from South Africa?
In terms of organizing conferences, in terms of collaborating with NGOs, you as the academia, what are you doing so that, because COVID has taught us that you don't need to be in a place to make something happen. Now, for example, you're in Nigeria, I'm in Kampala, Professor Juliet is in Johannesburg. We have a Dr. Peter in Zimbabwe, but here we are working together. So you, the academic, how are you engaging the NGOs? How are you engaging yourselves so that you can have an impact on the continent?
Okay, thank you for that question. In terms, there is an intensive, conferences going on different topics and different issues, and those bordering on educational leadership, for those of them in art education or foundation of education in Nigeria. And one beautiful thing about universities in Nigeria, that every department will now, every year or biannually, will hold conferences depending on the date. And it deals also with the issue of education and leadership. But most of the time you see some of these papers that come out, what do you do with them? Just like, I can't pronounce her name, I'm sorry, from South Africa, the professor from South Africa said, there are issues that are pressing on educational leadership. And after the conferences, they come up with this beautiful, outcome. What do we do with them? But in terms of awareness, they are there. But let me tell you and link it up with the NGOs that I know. If you will permit me to go to that of the NGOs that I'm feasible to talk about, there is now a conscious link of issues affecting educational leadership with the NGOs. NGOs who are now interested now go and look for avenues for a sensitization of teachers and head teachers, and state governments are doing that for head teachers and teachers, and the building of capacities for leadership for principals of primary schools and secondary schools. But that of the university, they do it at a higher special level, which is concerned with NUC, National University Commission, that, their major aim is to implement, monitor, evaluate what is happening in the university. But as for, yes, conferences are going on, people are being aware, little, workshops are being displayed for head teachers of primary schools, both from at the NGO levels and at the, state levels that are concerned with the primary, secondary, and then the tertiary school universities are different.
Well, I think
so. There is. Yes. There are moves there, and then sensitization, advocacy, workshop, all these things are being organized, conferences being organized for them, that, what are leaderships? How do we do it in the Nigerian, looking at the cultures and the beliefs and the values of the Nigerian before we start distributing it to that of Africa?
Well, I think very much.
Are you hearing me?
We are hearing you perfectly well.
I hope I'm making sense.
Yeah, thank you very much, Professor Nkadi from the University of Nigeria. Now we go south to Zimbabwe. Dr. Christine Peter, I'm told, is online. You're welcome, Doctor.
Very much.
Yeah, we are sorry you couldn't join in time because of network issues in Harare. But I would actually request that you sit well so that we can really get to see you properly. We are just seeing the head so that the viewer can actually see who Dr. Christine Peter is. Now, how is the situation like in Zimbabwe? Because when you talk about Zimbabwe, the rest of Africa, we know about Mugabe, and of course we know we know about we learn about the Chumurenga. So this time around, we want to know the system. How is it like, the education system in Zimbabwe, and how is it being used to help not only the people of Zimbabwe but also to develop the continent?
Oh, thank you very much. I would like to say we are now in the Second Republic. As you all know, Mugabe is now a thing of the past. We do have a new president, His Excellency, the President of the Republic of Zimbabwe, Comrade Dr. Emerson Mnangagwa. And I would like to say, in terms of education and educational leadership, things are going fairly well. But from my background, because I'm a specialist in disability studies, my focus is on educators, learners, and staff with disabilities, and looking out where are they located and how is education leadership responding to their needs and concerns.
Yeah, please go ahead with that submission, because we really need to, perhaps the rest of Africa can borrow a leaf from Zimbabwe, how you are making it easier for children with disability to access education. Because remember, disability is not inability.
Yes, that's so true. Thank you very much. My focus in this past roundtable was on, I was looking at issues of sexual and gender-based violence, and looking at it and saying, should educational leadership, should we just focus on teaching methods, on research, or we need to look at the health of the educators, of the learners, of staff with disabilities who are more vulnerable to sexual and gender-based violence within the context of higher learning. Disability does not shield a person from sexual abuse. For example, we have cases of professors with disabilities who may also be migrants who are vulnerable or who are victims of sexual and gender-based violence within the education system. So my interest is to focus on and to call upon the educational leadership in Africa to say we cannot afford to ignore the sexual and gender-based violence which is perpetrated against educators, learners, and staff with disabilities within the higher learning institutions. Because if we do that, we are going to be sitting with issues of HIV, STIs, and the resources that are supposed to be channeled to education, mainstream education, may end up being diverted to deal with the health issues. So we need to look at these issues. We cannot afford to just focus on learning, but we need to look at the health issues as well, address the needs and concerns of educators, learners, and staff with disabilities who are generally marginalized. The intersection of disability and other issues, because disability is not the only thing that, for example, a professor has. That professor has gender, that professor has an age. How are these things playing out within institutions of higher learning? That is my focus.
Yeah, Doctor, that is your focus, true. But the deliberate interventions from Zimbabwe, from the government of Comrade Dr. Emerson Mnangagwa, what interventions, deliberate interventions that are being put in place so that persons with a disability can access education, and after accessing education can access jobs so that they can actually serve community. Because ideally in Uganda we have a number of interventions, and of course in other countries also have a number of interventions, but we just wanted to know the particular interventions in Zimbabwe that you would want to share with the viewers.
Thank you very much. I am very pleased to say that on 9 June 2021, our president launched for the first time in Zim the National Disability Policy for the country. And this policy includes a section that is dedicated to education. We also have a draft inclusive education policy. With these policies now, we are seeking to address the needs and concerns of not just learners with disabilities, but also educators and staff with disabilities. For example, we are looking at issues of providing assistive devices within the learning institutions, accessibility, not just to the physical environment, but to information as well. How do we provide information to all people in the higher learning, in the institutions of higher learning. So we are looking at providing, with consistency, sign language, braille, and other formats that are accessible to persons with disabilities, but in a systematic way. How do we make the environment accessible? SGB, responses and prevention of sexual and gender-based violence within the institutions of higher learning. How do we make sure that they are also accessible to persons with disabilities? So it's now a matter of, we have done a lot of work in Zimbabwe in terms of facilitating the voice of persons with disabilities, because we do believe that they are experts of their own experiences, and through what they say, they tell us, we then design policies and programs that address their needs and concerns.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Christine Peter. Dr. Christine Peter from Zimbabwe. And now I get back to studio. Nathan, let's look at the plight of the disabled. Is Uganda doing enough? Is East Africa doing enough to put a smile on the faces of the disabled children so that they can really access education, access jobs, and access any other services after the education?
Yeah, first of all, Uganda, like any other country in Africa, is not doing enough to help people with disabilities in education. However, I don't want to look mainly at people with disabilities. I want to look at inequality generally in education. How is Uganda helping a girl to catch up with cultural marginalization, which has been there for years? How is Uganda helping vulnerable families? There are families which are far, far poor. How is Uganda helping that girl who was born in Islam, doesn't know the father, or the parents died because of HIV, and she's alone, or he's alone? How is Africa benefiting from those ones who access education from the developed world, and this education perhaps is not trickling down to those people who pay taxes? You see, when we address inequality in education, actually we shall address issues of gender, issues of disability, of old age, and this is what we call sustainable education services. Therefore, for me, from the civil society, I would call upon the governments of Africa to look critically at issues of inequality in education sector. There is a blind eye wherever you go. Last time I was in Cape Town, I managed to move to a place called Bellevue. I had an interview with African there. And of course, I saw inequality. Therefore, if we could look at inequality, that would help us to address issues of people living with disabilities, of women, of poor people generally. Therefore, let's also look at the education we are getting. We get education which is not quality. Look at skills, the level of skills in Africa. We are so below standards. When you travel to countries like maybe Japan, you'll find that they have a skilled population. Why should Africa continue?
They don't have a schooled but a skilled population.
Yes, skilled population. Why should Africa continue to lose its resources to foreign world, to developed world, looking for education? These professors whom we have, we should benefit, we should facilitate them to make sure that we benefit from the education that they get. I was reading, is it yesterday, a presentation by Juliet. She was talking about feminism. I found out that really she's completely knowledgeable and perhaps she's well educated. But how can we tap from her expertise? Look, before independence, our people used to go to Europe, get education, but they came back and liberated Africa. So this education that we get must liberate Africa economically, but also propel Africa to a developed world. Therefore, for me, my biggest concern is one, how we raise the education that we get, how we reduce inequality, and how we get sustainable education. Because without that, I have a fear that hemorrhaging our resources to develop the world will continue. I feel so bad. I was in Coventry and I found very many Nigerians In fact, Coventry University, the biggest population were Nigerians. And I asked myself, if these kids were getting this education from Nigeria, how much money would be saved and how much money would be again trickled down to the poor and improve Nigeria. Therefore, to me, the issue of inequality in education, the issue of allocating limited resources to education, the issue of actually we brought up shaping our education leadership and the management, who is at the helm of education. Is this person a politician? Is he or her there only to protect interests? What we have to put in education is quality. Education should not be an area for flukers. It shouldn't be an area for politicians. It should be an area for those people who are concerned with national development. Just like army, you cannot become a leader of a barracks when you are not maybe a colonel. But
well,
yes.
Thank you very much. And this takes me to South Africa, that is Johannesburg, to Professor Juliet. Professor Juliet, there is an issue here coming up of inequality in education. And COVID-19 has actually widened the inequality that children of the well-to-be, the children of the middle class and the bourgeois have been going to school, but the children of the poor could not actually manage to study online because of the COVID-19 restrictions. Perhaps others even have married off at a young age. So let's look at, from your point of view as the chair of the Africa Education Leadership Roundtable, what would you propose so that really education in Africa is not seen as a vessel to perpetuate inequality in society?
Yes, and I think one of the goals of the Africa Roundtable for 2021 was to bring to the foreground, the importance of education leadership, to refrain, to desist from being abstract, technicist, instrumentalists, where we focus only on fiscal related matters in terms of what's working in the school and what isn't, where we focus on discipline, whether students are behaving themselves or coming to school or not, but to really understand how the pandemic has exposed more forcefully, not that it wasn't there, but it's brought to our attention how deep our inequalities in education are. And we can no longer, as education leaders, divorce ourselves and engage in abstract kind of thinking. So with regard to making education leadership more contextual, more relevant, more sensitive to what is going on in the lives of not just children, but parents and educators themselves. There is a tendency when we talk about education to focus only on the lives of children and to become sensitized to what they may be deficient or lacking in terms of resources, whether it be social, economic resources. But from research that we've conducted and experiences that we've observed, educators themselves experience a whole lot of inequalities. There is an assumption that educators may be middle class, but from the work that we've done, we've noticed that also teachers themselves undergo extreme levels of poverty, instability. We've seen food insecurity come to the fore across the board. We've seen lack of housing security come to the fore when governments across the world asked people to stay indoors and to remain in lockdown. There was a taken for granted assumption that everybody lived in a house that had access to connectivity and electricity, and that was surely not the case. So I think that the roundtable in particular was trying to bring to the foreground the issues of diversity, inclusion, equity, not just in terms of what has traditionally been the focus in terms of just disability, which is not to discount the importance of that, but in terms of race, in terms of gender. Women, the research also that came out showed that women that were forced to stay in homes with abusive partners, there was an increase in gender-based violence and they had no place else to go. And so they were held captive on several levels. So the conference was trying to widen the lens and the landscape in terms of what diversity means. Certainly South Africa is notorious for its race-related issues, which persist despite several 2 decades and if not more 3 decades coming to of democracy. Class-related issues, socioeconomic related issues. What about citizenship, the undocumented, who even up to now, some of them have problems accessing the vaccine, which is freely available. But if you don't have the requisite documentation, that becomes a barrier to accessing even healthcare. So these are the things that the Roundtable has tried to bring to the fore, to be able to show that exclusionary practices are not just based on just maybe disability, but it is far more complex in terms of gender, race, skin color, education, ability, your wealth, your language, your body size, your mental health, which is another issue that is really gaining prominence because the pandemic has taken its toll on pretty much all of us. Some of us have experienced compounded loss pretty much every day or every other day. We have losing family members, and yet we're expected to pull ourselves together, manage our emotions, show up to work, and continue with business as usual.
Well, thank you.
Yeah,
thank you, Professor Juliet. We now move to Nigeria. I can see time is not on our side. Professor, in 1.5 minutes, your parting shot, Professor Nkadi from Nigeria. In 1.5 minutes, your parting shot, because we actually supposed to be out of here in the next 8 minutes.
A platform for for developing such an idea of shaping our education leadership. Monday, Professor Juliet Nkadi, Dr. Petra from Zimbabwe, we all have a part to play. And there is one thing that I believe: I don't quit. Once I have an idea and can impart on one person and impart on a child, then you continue to do so. We cannot quit. And we make up, Nathan, we make up also part of that government. So wherever our job is, we will continue to do the best we can in terms of shaping our education. Say what you can, whether you're in the classroom, you are imparting, whether you are in the church, you are imparting, whether everywhere you are imparting. So I'm begging each and every one of us, you think that you're not making an impact in whatever we are doing, we cannot change the whole Africa as a whole. In as much as Africa is a complex continent on its own, you take Nigeria, for example, is a complex country on its own, with over 120 million people, disabled and abled. And we keep on talking, we keep on sensitizing, we keep on doing our advocacy, we keep on putting our training and enhancing and making sure that NGOs, local NGOs, I know I have worked a lot with UNICEF, MacArthur Foundation, WHO, wherever you can, make sure you touch a life, and that does it. And that life goes on and impart another person and impart another.
Well, thank you very much,
Dr. Petra. Thank you so much for us being part of this.
Well, thank you.
We have a lot of work to do.
Thank you very much, Professor Nkadi Onyegebu from the University of Nigeria. Of course, time is not on our side. I wish we had more times that we could have you present on and on. Now to Zimbabwe, that is Dr. Christine Peter. In 1.5 minutes, your parting shot.
Thank you very much. I just want to say, refer to what Professor Juliet has said with regards to diversity, equity, and inclusion, what all colleagues have said. We agree that it is very important for us, and the time is right for us to pay adequate attention to issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion, because only that way can we be able to uphold the spirit of the SDGs, Agenda 2030, of leaving no one behind. Because then we address issues of children. We have been orphans and vulnerable children. issues of, like, for example, during COVID-19, we lost a lot of parents and then their children who no longer have their parents. How do we, in Zimbabwe, we are making an effort through what we call the BEAM, the Basic Education Assistance Module, where we ensure that such children from poverty environments are being assisted with fees, with uniforms, with, if they are disabled, with assistive devices and their books. So diversity, equity, and inclusion is important if we are serious about upholding.
Dr. Peter, I'm sorry, I'm cutting you short in the interest of time. Thank you very much. Yes, to Studio Nathan in 1 minute so that we can go to Professor in South Africa.
I just want to emphasize that the states, countries of Africa, should ensure that they implement sustainable development goals. And if you look at goal number 1 is no poverty, and goal number 4 is quality education. I want to emphasize that we should promote that one as leaders of Africa in education. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nathan Gahungu. Then to Professor Juliet, of course, the chair of the Africa Education Leadership Roundtable. In a minute and a half, what is the future of Africa Education Leadership Roundtable? What do they have for us?
Okay, I suppose we will continue reaching out. We are really, one of our key goals is to connect to our colleagues on the African continent so that we can collaborate and we can use the collective strength in able to address these issues that are presented. We don't want to keep on rehearsing what is not going right in our countries. We want to be transformative education leaders who realize that we don't need titles of power to be able to effect change in our classrooms, in whatever sector we're working in, and that we each of us have a commitment and a calling and a moral and ethical obligation. If we wait for our leaders, we see that there's a lot of distraction in terms of the corruption and the kind of shenanigans that goes on in national politics. So we cannot be distracted by that while thousands of people languish in poverty, insecurity, gender-based violence. So going forward, the aims and the goals of the Africa Education Leadership remain about seeing how we can join our hands together across the virtual table to bring about meaningful change in all of our lives.
Well, I must thank you very much, Professor Juliet Perumali from the University of Johannesburg, and also for having organized the 6th Education Leadership Roundtable, a forum for the academia in education and other education stakeholders on the continent to chart a way forward for an education system that works for the continent. I also must thank you, Professor Nkadi Onyegebu from the University of Nigeria, and also Dr. Christine Peter from Harare, that is Zimbabwe. And in studio, I must thank you, Nathan Gahungu from APSIS, for actually finding time off your busy schedule and joining me on this good show. Amande Akol Amazima saying bye-bye. Always tune in to UBC. Together, we can inspire Uganda.
Welcome to the home of our stars. Come on in. We have our movies, gossip, reality.